So hello and welcome to this webinar today, focusing on the very important but sometimes misunderstood and with so many moving parts involved in it, can be really difficult to get right. Today, I'm delighted to be bringing you the topic of BYOD. BYOD, I might hear you say, what is BYOD? Well, it stands for Bring Your Own Device, and there are many different ways in which you can implement a Bring Your Own Device strategy into your IT estate. There are loads and loads and loads to think about, and so I'm absolutely delighted to have with me today two people who have done it in lots of different ways. They've sort of been surrounded by neighbouring schools and other sort of educational establishments where things haven't gone quite so right. Like me, in my experience as well, things don't always work well, and so I'm sure things have gone a little bit awry with some of the work they've done in their settings as well. And sometimes, actually, it's the things where things have gone not so right where we learn more than if things have gone swimmingly brilliant the whole time. Every day is a learning day, as someone I know says. And so it gives me great delight to bring on two people who have got lots and lots of experience, both here in the UK and in a variety of different places around the world as well. My first guest is Ashley Bryant. I'll bring Ashley in now. Ashley, you are currently a Director of IT Innovation, I believe, at the Frankfurt International School, but you've got much more experience than just that. Could you share a little bit about your experience and what you bring to the game in this conversation around Bring Your Own Device, please?
Yeah, I'd love to. So, hi, my name's Ashley, and I was a previous kindergarten teacher and a technology coach at the teacher level. And I've lived through COVID, so that was a large learning curve with BYOD for schools in my community that hadn't moved to a one-to-one or any sort of device strategy. I did this both in the UAE, in Abu Dhabi specifically, and I am now in Germany in another BYOD school. So.
Brilliant stuff. Thank you. And I know we've talked about this plenty. We've set up a little WhatsApp group, and in the run up to the recording today, yourself and myself and our other guest, who I'll introduce in just a second, I've been sharing around the sort of things we'd like to sort of cover and talk about. It's a really big topic, isn't it, BYOD?
Oh, I mean, there's so many different versions, variations. Yeah, you could talk for days.
Absolutely. So we've got a lot to cover. So let's jump straight into bringing in our other guest. No stranger to things with NetSupport, big fan of our products as well, and someone that I've worked with in many different ways and shapes and forms over the years. It gives me great pleasure to welcome the upcoming from August head teacher of British International School Abu Dhabi and co-author in the EdTech Playbook and many other sort of badges aside the Mr. Ollie Lewis. Welcome, Ollie. How are you doing?
Hi, Mark. Good, thank you. It's been a great day here. Been involved in all sorts of different things at school today. So it's been wonderful. We've had kind of prize giving and all those things happen. So yeah, really joyous occasion.
Brilliant stuff. Thank you so much, Ollie. And I like Ashley. Could you share a little bit about your experience? What sort of experience have you got that brings you to the table where you feel like you can talk about BYOD?
Sure, I've kind of led on BYOD and digital strategies in a multitude of different contexts, both in the UAE, like Ashley, in the UK state, UK independent sectors, and I've been involved in kind of technology for a long time. Like Ashley, started out as a classroom teacher, not actually a technologist at the start, and I've kind of grown in my career into technology because I can see the transformative power that it has, and I've seen it done well, and I've seen it done badly, and I've learned from it in both different guises. So I think I take from all of those different experiences, good insights into what successful BYOD and learning looks like.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Ollie. I know both of you have got an awful lot to share. BYOD can often be misunderstood. Some people sort of conflate that as being perhaps just thinking about sort of any device use, like just asking a student to sort of just get their phone out, and we know there are lots of healthy, sometimes unhealthy debates about whether phones should be used in education. We might touch on that today, I'm not sure. But Ashley, just to sort of set the scene a little bit, for those people less sort of familiar with the term, how would you define sort of bring your own device in an educational context? Are we talking about any personal device, or are there typically some parameters around what's acceptable?
Yeah, I would say that generally most schools, when they really deep dive and think about a plan, it's going to be a specific device. So we kind of make a joke that it's bring your own disaster if there's no like strategic plan. I've been through some BYODs where there was no dedicated device choice, and that causes a lot of confusion and stress and anxiety for the educators and the tech support. So yes, a perfect BYOD would be a managed specific device. It might be a different device depending on the grade level. So BYOD, potentially iPad only in an elementary school, and then only MacBooks in an upper school. But it would be student owned or family owned devices generally. And yeah, so it really depends on how the school decides to structure it. I always recommend a one device environment in a classroom. So like you said, sometimes it can be a disaster, but well thought out, it can work out pretty good.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you used a word in your sort of first, I think, sentence even, that I think is absolutely key. And I've worked with schools where they haven't considered this key word, okay, and it means that the children can sort of go do whatever they want, right? And don't have a sort of specific guardrails. We talk about attention deficit when it comes to distractions using technology. The word, of course, I'm thinking of is managed. And I think we'll talk about managed devices more moving forward throughout the conversation. But having the devices managed is absolutely key, right, Ashley?
100%. And on so many levels, people don't always think that once you do BYOD, the infrastructure even has to change in your school. There might be people who are like, oh, we're just going to start letting all the kids bring devices. And then you're like, access points. Oh my goodness. So really well thought out, managed, planned BYOD is going to be the most successful. So yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, it's a really timely sort of thing as well, isn't it? But it brings all of its own challenges, and certainly bringing in this idea of having devices managed is important. You talked, Ashley, about bring sort of a specific device. Some schools that I've worked with and worked in have had BYODs where it's sort of BYOD from a list. Obviously, both all three of us have been involved in implementations where it's just been a one-to-one, sometimes provided by the school, sometimes bought by the parents but brought into school. Ollie, jumping over to you, like BYD is often mentioned in the same breath as one-to-one strategies, but they are quite different. Well, what sort of differences are there in terms of implementation, expectations, and impact on teaching and learning between a one-to-one and a BYOD? And it could be BYOD with a specific device or BYOD from a list of sort of specific spec levels and all these sort of things. What are the sort of differences and nuances, Ollie?
Yeah, there's loads to unpick in that, Mark. While both of those models are great because they ensure students have access to technology, there are, like you're kind of signposting me to talk about differences in terms of equity, management, teaching consistency, and so many things. In a one-to-one model, typically what you'd find is the school would provide a standard device, or like you would suggest, from your BYOD, this is the device you choose, and you can kind of choose a variation on the specs from that particular device. That gives you exactly what Ashley was signposting there again, which it gives you uniformity in terms of the hardware that the students have, the software that they have, and then the kind of support structures that you build around that. So that simplifies things for not just the educators, but the IT teams that are supporting kind of in the background. And every learner then has access to the same tools, and that really does allow you to be consistent. It aligns inclusivity across your kind of teaching strategy, and it's also just simply easier to manage from a kind of IT real estate perspective, as well as from a safeguarding perspective. Whereas when you have a BYOD policy where there isn't choose one of these variations of specification of the same style of device, but bring any device as long as the spec minimum requirement is kind of here. That shifts one burden financially often to the parents, which is kind of good for schools in terms of their kind of budgetary constraints, but it adds a massive layer of complexity If you put yourself in the shoes of a teacher, say your classroom size is 24 on average, and you've got 7, 8, 9, 10 different specs and styles of device, it's really difficult to kind of problem solve that as a teacher when you're not necessarily a technologist, right? In fact, it's scary just thinking about that. And we've all been in that situation. I can see you nodding and smiling right now. The truth of the matter there is that when all those students bring in all those different styles of devices, it affects the reliability and the consistency of what you're trying to do at a classroom level. Yes, they can have equity of access in terms of the kind of ecosystem that you use to navigate, but those complexities generally around classroom management and the management of the devices and things like that. So whilst the learning experience is there, it's inconsistent for those learners because they have different compute powers and capabilities across those devices. So BYOD is great in many guises. It offers you that kind of flexibility, but it also offers you the kind of real world dynamics that you see in terms of digital diversity, if I can kind of call that. And the key, like you've both said already, is having a really clear strategy that kind of mitigates for those inconsistencies through things like common platforms, agreed minimum specs for the devices, a clear policy that makes sure that you can equitably support every learner.
Great stuff. Thanks, Ollie. There's loads and loads and loads in there. And I'm going to go off piece from our little planned question thing already, really. Because I'm going to take a step back because, you mentioned some really important things in there, Ollie, like around safeguarding and equity of access and all of that. If we've seen anything, you mentioned the pandemic before, Ashley, with and that was like whoa around how we make things work and things. But during the pandemic, we having technology there was an absolute given. We needed it because without it, children just didn't have access to learning because we couldn't be in the same place and space and all those sort of things. And some things like our products, like Classroom.Cloud, were really instrumental in making that sort of thing work during the pandemic. But here we are quite a few years on now, and we're seeing, and in the pandemic we saw schools that had embraced technology really took to remote learning like ducks to water. Okay, whereas those schools that hadn't sort of struggled. Okay, but now that we're out of the pandemic, I mentioned about BYOD sort of being relevant, particularly relevant at the moment, and so I want to take a step back, framing it around digital skills, future proofing our young people, ensuring they're kept safe, like you were talking about, Ollie. Why is BYOD important now? And that's a question to both of you. And I'll put it to Ashley first, if that's okay, because you just spoke, Ollie. I think I'll just sort of divide it up a little bit. But could you just summarize again, just sort of really laying out and setting the scene for people, framing it in mind of all the things that are around safeguarding and management and devices and making sure that things can happen consistently across your estate. Why is it important now, Ashley?
I think because, and I wanted to say something, and I think this goes along with something Ollie said, is it is what we have to get used to. And I think that our schools are a place that kids can fail and fail safely. They do it within the bounds of a building of people who care about them. And I think if we kind of go on the opposite, which we've seen definitely happen post-COVID, people are like, get the devices out of the room. We spend too much time on a screen. If we completely reject it, we're not supporting them in that way of growing. They don't have that chance to fail. And then when they do go out into the world and they're using their device and using social media and, get their first phone, they're going to make errors. They're going to do things that, is much scarier than what they could do with us. And so, I think it's so important, as much as we talk about balance and, removing screens as, so they're not distracting, but we also have to find that, that pendulum swing. We kind of went one direction really, really far. Now let's figure out where we are in the middle. And going back to something Ollie said, I think as well, is about the fear of devices with that mixed environment. BYOD can also be a fear for teachers. They don't want to use it because it's too hard. Oh, it will break or it won't work. So it's also really a learning thing for the educators as well. And, we can only be 21st century learners with everyone in the classroom and getting involved. So, yeah.
No, absolutely brilliant. Thank you, Ashley. And what are your thoughts, Ollie?
I think that if you look at what we do in education, right? We do so much. And I think if you look now at kind of where we've come from in the journey since COVID to 2025 now, and then the research coming out from the World Economic Forum, I don't think we can continue to say that kind of digital skills, digital literacy are nice to haves. I think that they are, like Ashley said, a core to kind of future readiness, the future preparedness for the world of work that's kind of coming, for the jobs that don't exist yet, and all of those different things that you hear. And when you look at the emergence of AI in recent years, and us trying to still navigate that path while developing digital skills, digital literacy with the students, I think it's fundamental to their success. And if we look at how education might change, and then how the world of work might change, I think there's greater flexibility now than we've ever seen. I think teaching pedagogy is kind of starting to evolve. I don't think that we are doing service to education if we aren't preparing learners for what's happening in the real world. And I think that is fundamentally key. And like Ashley said, digital citizenship is also a core part of that. We need to teach and educate kids on what good looks like.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I smiled when you said it. We went sort of 14 minutes without the AI klaxon there, Ollie. You were the first to do it. We should have had a sweepstake on that one. But no, you're absolutely right. And you mentioned service, and and I don't know what your values are in education, but one which runs through many educators that I know and leaders, like a stick of rock, is the idea of we are servants to the communities that we serve, and so we need to absolutely do right by them. Brilliant responses from both of you, and really does lay out why BYOD is important and why we should be making sure we embed it within our schools. It's difficult to sort it out, though, right? Because the devil's in the details. So who pays for it? Who owns it? Who's responsible? And are there different models, Ollie?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot to kind of unpick there. Who owns what typically lies in a BYOD model with the family, right? But then when it comes to kind of in school, the MDM is the responsibility of school. And that's
For
what's
those
central
listening,
here.
an MDM is what, Ollie?
Mobile device management.
Great,
So that's where it's really important that you have good tools that can manage those mobile devices. They enforce, support, whichever kind of language you'd like to use there, your security policies. They enable you as an organization to kind of deploy what apps you might want to have access to. They do all of those kind of things behind the background to safeguard your students, to make sure that it's not intruding on them personally, but also they are safeguarded within the context of schools. And then, of course, you need an acceptable use policy, right? And that needs to be translated. And if I take that in the context of the UAE, and Ashley will kind of smile at this, you need a student-friendly version of that, so that you have your kind of adult version, but a student-friendly version of that essentially outlines expectations, behaviours, and kind of protocols around how you behave online. So we're gone full circle here, back to what kind of Ashley and I were talking about earlier, which is digital citizenship and positive digital citizenship. Can't get my words out there. And that those things are really important within your school. So, there is, I guess, financial responsibility on both sides of the fence here. It's the school's responsibility to make sure the devices are safely managed and the children are kept safe and secure in the online world.
Brilliant, thanks, Ollie. And I'm mixing things up a little bit here, because the next sort of three questions are all sort of interwoven here around safeguarding, filtering, use at home, breakages, damages. What about let's say I'm a parent? I'm really up for BYOD. I'm on board with that, but I'm not happy with you monitoring my child's device. When they're at home. I'm sure you've been in plenty of conversations with parents when you've been implementing these sort of things. Between the both of you, what does it look like around safeguarding on site, on prem versus at home? Can you do both? What are the options schools can be thinking about around all of that? What do you do around insurance and breakages? Do your technicians spend all day just fixing broken laptop screens? Is that what happens? How do you do it, Ashley?
Well, I'm actually really lucky. Our school, we are BYOD, we're Mac based, but we have a great IT team. But we went with the plan of having loaner devices on in the building. So while our kids are meant to bring their own device, we do have a small set of loaners. And it was a concern at first. We thought, oh, the kids are always going to forget their laptop. They're not going to be responsible. They'll come dead. And we actually don't hand them out as often as we thought, but it is such a safeguard for the parents, because if the device has to go to the Apple store to get repaired, or if the device, got left at Granny's house when they flew over from the States, we do have a few around. So that was the first one you asked me about. The second one was safeguarding, and I think this is such a conversation that we have to have with parents. And my experience between the UAE and Germany is so different. In Germany, in the UAE, we made everyone download it. We said, this is what's on your device. We got the buy-in from the parents, and that's what we did. But in Germany, we can't. And so that's a really interesting conversation. So anything we do for safeguarding specifically has to be in our network. We can't have anything on the device. But that doesn't say we don't talk to parents and make sure that they're aware of what they can do. So the things like the Android and Apple-based parent support platforms, we have tons of workshops, one-on-ones with parents about setting things up like school time, downtime. And I think those are the things that sometimes parents don't realize. I had a conversation last week with a parent who had screen time set up on their iPhone for the kid, but didn't realize that it overlapped onto all of the Apple devices. So I was speaking to them, and they're like, you could see light bulbs going off. They're like, this is fabulous. I didn't even know that I could do this. So I think it is for that part, at least, especially for home time, it's just constant education. We're not just educating our students, we're educating our parents as well, making sure that everyone in the community is aware of what they can and can't do.
Yeah, absolutely. And that ties in with something that both you and I, but I'll ask you the question rather than answering myself, Ollie, that we've spoken about an awful lot around digital cognition, right? About knowing how to, when to, all these sort of things. Could you sort of lead on from that sort of prompt there around that, and then perhaps talk about how you sort of manage things like breakages and insurance and all those sort of things around all things we mentioned there in your setting, Ollie?
Yeah, sure. So no different to kind of Ashley's situation. We involve the parents, right? And our kind of model of kind of digital cognition is competence, confidence, cognizance. So the first three of the 5 C's. So parents need to be confident in what you're doing. Okay. They also need to understand that you've put all of those kind of necessary guardrails in place. So competence within your kind of network infrastructure, or your MDM, your mobile device management, and then have an understanding of kind of how your acceptable use policy clearly defines and delineates responsibilities for various things. So clarity is really, really important in that part. In terms then of cognizance, it's exactly what Ashley just talked about. It's raising awareness through education to your parental community of the capabilities of some of those facets to your MDM. So time-based profiling is kind of what we're working with our parents at Amity on at the moment. We ask them to opt into one of two things. Do you want your child's device to be kind of monitored during school hours only, or do you want it 24 hours so that we can be proactive rather than reactive in the event where something goes wrong? And many of our parents aren't aware, oh, you can do that. That's a real thing. I have choice within the matter of that. And that's been really great. Tied into that then around kind of your policy, and what you're asking is insurance and repairs. Usually that's wrapped up within kind of the family as they procure the device. What we do is we use a reseller where parents can choose the kind of level of device that they buy. Then there's the option as well to choose insurance in that ties in with the device and the life of the device. So there's always more opportunities, and I know schools are busy. I know time is the one resource that we never have, but there's always more that we can do with parents to educate them and support them with the dialogue around not just digital but overarching education for all things technology related. So that's kind of our approach to that, kind of clear delineation and education as to who's responsible for what, where and when within the context of digital technologies.
Bro. And so did you have, Ashley was saying about having loaners and that sort of thing. Do you have a backup like that sort of in place within your setting, Ollie?
Yeah, we've got some backups, but we try to use those as rarely as possible. I can't think on the back of my kind of hand how often we've actually loaned a device out. It's just we're in a position at Amity where it's just part of your teaching and learning toolkit, right? You have your backpack, your planner, your device, your books, your pens, pencils. You know, happens every now and then. Can't think of the time it's happened recently.
I suspect then if you can't think of it being that recent, then it doesn't happen that often, which it would be a good thing, I'd have thought.
Yeah,
Happy
absolutely.
days.
Happy days.
Brilliant stuff. Well, listen, thanks both for sort of feeding into that. I've got your name sort of linked to the next question, but obviously, Ashley, if you wanted to share, because certainly I was looking at recently actually about things in Germany actually, and not where you're based, but one of the German states are actually sort of looking to move away from Microsoft 365 around sort of data governance and security, and with some sort of schools and people within government in Copenhagen looking at a similar sort of thing. So I want to ask questions really right now about data governance, and certainly things are really interesting within the UAE context as well. And maybe Ollie, from your experience of working here within trusts in the UK, leading on digital there as well, you could perhaps add the sort of UK GDPR perspective on it too. So, look, what are the implications for student devices if they're owned by parents, given to their children? What sorts of implications are there for data protection, compliance, cybersecurity? If we're thinking about the AI, there we go, second klaxon, around intellectual property and all those sort of things as well. How can schools sort of mitigate these sort of risks effectively, Ollie?
Yeah, I mean it's really difficult. It's really interesting to see that news recently that actually it's a school's responsibility with the big tech firms. I thought that was quite interesting to sort of see that. Yes, technology does have associated risks around kind of data protection, compliance, cybersecurity, especially here in the UAE. Now that is a real part of ADEC's recent digital policy. You can still effectively navigate that really difficult work. It's around your kind of framework and the technical infrastructure you have, but you need to make sure you're aligned with that. So whether you're kind of UK GDPR or Europe, whether you're a FERPA is the US one, or the incoming, who knows what it will be called in the UAE, kind of, I guess, data protection impact assessments are the thing, right? It's what we need to do. We need to ask sensible questions of the vendors around how they use and store and share the data with any associated third-party networks, so that as a school you can kind of identify and mitigate any possible risks associated with that when the students are using their devices. Then it's really important you just do things that we would all say that's good practice in our daily lives, right? So you would ask for things like single sign-on or two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication. I'm pretty sure that all of us on our personal devices have some way of protecting our banking details, right? Whether that's facial recognition or you have a message texted to you that has the password to get you in the first instance. That should be no different for us in schools. So we should be promoting actively that idea of kind of strong access controls and encryption of data, so that any platform you use, whether it's Microsoft 365 or any cool tool like, I don't know, let's say Quizzes, we should be vetting those things and their policies to make sure that there's that kind of accountability trail on both sides of the fence. In fact, Mark and I, in our book, have written a chapter all about working with vendors, so I would recommend reading that. I don't want to steal too much because I need to leave Ashley with some things as well.
Great stuff. Thanks, Ollie. So what are things like for you then? And you've got an interesting lens as well. So obviously similarly to Ollie and his work in Abu Dhabi now, Ashley, but then working in Germany. What's your sort of thoughts and experiences? I mean, good is good wherever you are, right? Or is it not?
I would say that moving from the UAE, GDPR was definitely it was an interesting thing to learn about, and learning when and how. And I think one of the biggest challenges we have, and now that GDPR is a couple of years old, it's not as big of a challenge, but it's still that challenge of wanting to try cool new things, but understanding who to ask and talk to when you do it. So I think with our educators, they're always coming to my office going, oh, I tried this or I did this. And I'm like, okay, did we make sure that we're on the right track of what we're allowed to use? How did you log into it? Who did you give access to it? So yeah, it's just something that it's now in our day-to-day lives. We talk about it a lot. And now with the EUAI Act, which is another one we're keeping track of. So we've just done a massive survey of staff, and really, I think the education piece around GDPR has been amazing because most people go into AI in that same lens, like, ooh, should I be telling it all of this data? Like, so we're hoping that it's kind of we're in the right track, but it's definitely something to continue learning about and making sure that we are signing in. We have alias email addresses with our with Google, so that if there is a platform that we're a bit nervous about, we just use an alias. But it's also something I would hope that all of these big ed tech companies get behind as well. And they understand you're not going to have people in Europe, you're not going to have people in the UAE joining your service if you're not willing to support these data governances. We've just had one recently that basically looked at us and said, it's too complicated, we're not interested. And so they lost out on a contract. So, but lots of things to think about.
Absolutely. And then with the vendor hats on, and this is the approach at Net Support. So, we are fervent believers in privacy by design. So when we co-create our products as well. So we don't do things to our clients, as it were. We work with our clients. We find, if we take a more mature product like classroom.cloud, when we're looking to develop things, the new developments come from requests from schools. And it's not just like when Ashley says, oh, I'd love this. Right, it's what when there's the moss has really gathered some pace down the hill. It's picked up lots of other moss, and we don't sort of work on it. But it is about making sure that you do the right thing. And we can that sort of thinking runs deep in education, right? Doing the right thing is always the right thing. And the best leaders will act without technology, will act in that sort of way. And we feel that not only is it the right thing to do, but actually, given that we work so heavily in education, but by taking that privacy by design approach, it shows that we do the right thing because it is the right thing. And so, Ollie's just waving to keep his lights on there. Thanks, Ollie. And so, completely brilliant responses there from both of you. I want to, something I share an awful lot is just because you can use technology doesn't necessarily mean that you should. So when I'm visiting schools and looking at how teachers are using technology, I'm always happy to see teachers not using tech, right? If they've actually got a reason for not using it, because the technology doesn't bring anything to the game. Obviously, tech can help with loads and loads of things. And so when they are using tech, I want to see it having and adding value, whether that's reducing workload or helping with their teaching or helping with student learning. So if we're considering BYOD, you're both clearly fans of it. Firstly, to yourself, Ashley, and if you wanted to add something on for this as well, Ollie, yourself, with your physics teacher hat on for a minute, because I know you're a big fan of OneNote and live demos and FET sims and all that, right? So, on the ground, Ashley, BYOD, what does it look like when it's working well? What sort of things? What are the, to use teacher terms, the waggles? What does a good one look like? It could be around teacher workflow or curriculum delivery, instructional design, learner experience. What does a good one look like?
Honestly, I think if it's planned and strategically developed, it can be magical. Walking into a classroom and seeing, a teacher using something like Apple Classroom or something, sharing great work on the board, seamlessly sharing it, or keeping track of what everybody's doing on their devices to ensure everybody's on task, or even to the point where everybody's off doing independent work or group work. They're collaborating because they're in the same ecosystem, creating great presentations or videos. Even for students, I know Ollie has lots of multilingual kids. I've got lots of multilingual kids, a kid sitting in the corner with headphones on, listening to a text that they might not be able to access because it's above their reading level, or, text to speech. There's so many amazing things going to be happening in the classroom when it's done well. Cords running around the classroom because the things aren't charged, because, those are all chaos when it's not planned well. But when it's planned well and everyone's in the same ecosystem, it can be really, really awesome to see.
Do you know, Ashley, the thing I loved most about that response, right? You talk to people in ed tech, right? And I know both of you well, so I know that you're a bit like me in that you're pretty. Most rooms you go into, you're normally the geekiest person there, right? But the fact that you shared Apple Classroom, which in 2025 isn't like the if you think about sort of 2012, I mean that's like amazing mirroring and Apple Classroom and control. I mean that'd be amazing. But in 2025, that's not like the latest and greatest, the most sort of like woohoo stuff. But you know what? It makes a massive difference, right? And I love that you've included that as your very very first example. And it was almost like if, and again, you both know me, I'm not the biggest fan of SAMR, but actually, that's the substitution, augmentation, modification, redefinition model. For those of you that don't know it, check it out. But as you sort of move through your examples, it was almost like you moved through the sort of SAMR levels there. I love the. I'm a big fan of universal design for learning. Technology can really level the playing field for accessibility and access to learning and multiple means of representation and all that sort of thing. And the fact that you again highlighted just a child working quietly in the corner, headphones on, getting access to the curriculum because that's what the technology can support with. Some absolutely brilliant examples. And that for me, Ashley, is why I'd say BYOD is so important because it brings equality and equity, which is similar but not quite the same things inside the classroom. I love that response. Thank you so much, Ashley. Thank you. Ollie, go on top that.
I mean, I want to talk OneNote now because you've kind of segued me, and you know that I love that, right? So let's kind of build on that. Let's say a teacher is using OneNote, and the teacher or the student can then support in terms of accessibility with OneNote because you've got immersive reader baked into it, so they can have the text read to them at the right pace. For them, they can then use the kind of grammatical tools that are in there to support them with their learning. Or students or teachers can take the page where their learning is and they can automatically translate it to one of 50 different languages. Again, mega powerful, really useful for all the learners, inclusive by design, right, in terms of what you're doing. Or let's go one step further. Let's say that you have the collaboration space in OneNote and you're doing a practical in science. I'm a physics teacher by heart. And you know that I love this, right? So the old days where you might have everyone is collecting their data in one space, it's probably on paper in a book. The teacher circulates around the room, has to find the data from each group and can't really do any group-based analysis on it. Now, in the collaboration space, everyone can put their data into one central place. Everyone can see each other's data. Everyone then has the potential to analyze that data. They then develop inquiry-based learning skills, group investigations, and they can use their devices in a multitude of different ways. And that kind of allows that authentic, in-the-moment scientific investigation, peer learning, data literacy, context of the learning that they're undergoing. I mean, I could keep going with OneNote, right? But it's awesome. It's amazing. And the other tool that not everything has to be snazzy and jazzy, right? The visualizer, really simple. In our day, it was the OHP, the overhead projector. But now, simple, humble visualizer. It's one of the greatest tools out there. So if you're not a mega tech savvy school and don't have BYOD or things like that, just get everybody a visualizer. You can stick a book under it. You can do whole class feedback immediately in an instant. What awesome tools. And they don't cost the earth.
I was just looking for my Hue HD camera. They don't have to cost the earth, do they, Ollie? They're brilliant bits of kit. The Hue ones, I feel like I'm being sponsored by Hue right now, but they're low entry in terms of pricing, and of all of the sort of edtech research out there, the visualizer is the one where the most sort of impact on positive, because it's about modeling, isn't it, and sharing and conversations around learning and all of that. Brilliant. Do you know what I loved most about both of yours there, right? It's something that a former colleague of mine, and sorry because you've heard me say this a million times, Ollie, but a former colleague of mine, Zoe Elder, said back years ago to me when we were doing our one-to-ones about where technology should enhance but not dictate the learning. Right, that is exactly what you're both talking about. It's not, you're not doing stuff with technology just because you've got it in the room. You're looking at the various different ways that it can enhance and support, whether it's that learning process, whether it's the teaching process, or whether it's the things that help those sort of things bind together. Brilliant examples from you both there. Thank you so much. Ollie, you mentioned earlier about something that is super important with because you know, over the years, how many times we've been into sort of schools and visited schools and found technology that hasn't been sort of embedded well, and it's sort of in a box in the back of the classroom in terms of visualizers as well, right? Um, so yeah, the confidence and competence, you mentioned those earlier, Ollie. They're super important for parents. They're important for young people as well. You know, but it's also important for staff, right? So I know you and I are on, and Ashley are on the same page around confidence and competence, but it can be overlooked. And we know historically, you know, the reason why we've had, you know, failed implementations, the classic, right, is obviously the interactive whiteboard. Okay, you know, so with good training and support, you know, then we can make these things work and provide that confidence and competence for our colleagues. So, what kind of professional development, and I'll come to you first, Ollie, then ask you as well, Ashley, if you can. What sort of PD should be in place to ensure teachers feel secure and supported? Because, you know, I've delivered a fair share of my inset days, right? But, you know, a 1 hour session on Canva AI, whatever it is, right, isn't going to make you a confident or competent user. So how do you, and I suspect you might mention the ETH implementation stuff and all those sort of things, but what sort of things can you do to make sure that teachers do feel sort of secure and supported with it, Ollie?
You know, you hit the nail on the head there, signposting the ETH research, right? It should be structured, it should be ongoing, it should have chance for a teacher to explore the development of that tool. They should then have chance to talk about the exploration of that tool and what went well and what didn't go well with a trusted colleague, whether that's a tech coach or another person in their department. That's really important. They need training on both the kind of technical aspect of that particular tool as well as the pedagogical aspect of that tool. So teachers need that kind of targeted training on those specific common tools across their ecosystem. So you need almost like a digital skills framework for the common things that everyone's expected to use. So these are our kind of minimum requirements for these particular tools. If you're Microsoft, Google, or Apple, or any other, you should have that like core subset of this is what we need everyone to be really good at. So you've got consistency and confidence, competence, cognizance, and consistency in kind of all of those pieces. Don't get me wrong, though, you also need that kind of shifted mindset as to why this is important with your education. So it needs to go beyond the just, yeah, we're doing this because we have to. Actually, there's pedagogical value and merit in developing you professionally with these tools because we see the kind of transformative power of technology towards learning in there. And that training needs to be not a one capture all. Yes, it's great to have the big everybody, here's the blue sky thinking, the art of the possible, where we're going CPD. But then you need a kind of smorgasbord of synchronous and asynchronous to take us all the way back to COVID times where suddenly everybody learned what those words are. So you need chance for people to have that face-to-face in-person session, but also people to dip in and out of those kind of pre-recorded how-to videos and methods. So what we do at Amity is a mixture of all of those different things. We have the face-to-face stuff, then we have a library on our SharePoint that is ever growing of all of the little how-to videos that people can duck in and out of so that people get what they need when they need it and know who to go to when they need that particular thing to say, oh, I remember so-and-so did that CPD a while ago that I was in a different session at the time. Where do I go to reference that? It's on SharePoint in our Technology for Learning CPD library.
Brilliant, Ollie. Thank you. Well, the bit I really sort of drew out from there was, and I think this is a key thing when you think about BYOD and the tools you can use to make it work in the classroom. It's not just about knowing how to use a tool; it's about how to use it to support your teaching or their learning, right? Because we can all use PowerPoint, but how do you use PowerPoint to best help you be a teacher or for them to pick up? So you could that's cognitive science. That's thinking about dual coding and cognitive load and all those sort of things. How jumping in on that question for you, Ashley? How do you do that at your school with your work?
Well, I think two things. Ollie hit so many of the things I wanted to say, but one thing that I found really, really powerful is you can't give the same PD to a high school physics teacher as you give to a KG teacher. So that's one of the big things that I've noticed. Full school PD, when you're first introducing something, might be the way your school wants to go about doing it, but it really needs to be somewhat differentiated, as we're going to use one of those education words, to make sure that, you know, you don't have a physics teacher sitting in a PD session going, oh, why am I here? She's just talking about elementary stuff. And then they check out, even though there is so many things they could have learned, it's not something relevant for them. So I think definitely making it relevant, making sure that you're giving them those examples that they can take away. And then he also mentioned that SharePoint, making sure there's a clear place they know they can get help, because there's nothing more frustrating than not knowing where to go or how to get the information. So we have something similar. We have a site called a Tech Deck where we put all of our recordings, our how-tos, all of that. And that is a universal site. Within the site, there is divisional support, but they know that that's the place they can go. So I think those are the two big ones after all of the great things Ollie said.
Go on, Ollie.
I'd just add to that, and I know that Ashley is an advocate for this, and Mark, I certainly know you are, right? The most powerful resource you have is the people in your building. So wherever people are at on that journey, try and get them sharing. Like, one of the best things I've ever seen is in the second session, a couple of weeks after the first session, where someone that is not a tech person learned how to do something in OneNote, stood in front of all the staff and went, hey, I learned this and it was amazing. And I didn't know that you could use the graphing function in OneNote. And like, people just bounced off the enthusiasm from that maths teacher and were like, that's awesome. I'm so happy for them. And I want to learn something and share something next. So, you know, provide people with a chance to do that.
Yeah, brilliant, both. Thank you. And yeah, you're absolutely right, Ashley, about that sort of differentiation. It's funny, right? You know, we as educators, we know about how to cater to the needs of all the children in our classroom. So why do we do something completely different when we talk and teach teachers how to do this stuff? It boggles my mind. Other key important stakeholders, Ashley, are our parents. We talked about them a fair amount earlier as well. I'm mindful this session's going on a bit. We are covering so many different facets of BYOD here in the conversation today. Thank you so much to you for joining us for this session, and to yourselves, Ashley, and to you, Wally. We've got just a few little areas to cover. I want to talk about parents and how we sort of get them on board. Obviously, they're key. They're key, and we know from lots of research over the years that there's a really important triangulation between school, child, and home, and having that good home-school relationship is really, really important. So, when it comes to parents being key partners in BYOD, Ashley, what have you found that works well when it comes to preparing them from setting expectations to use at home? Because obviously, what parents think their children are up to versus what children are actually up to is often quite different, as we'll all know as parents ourselves. From you know, well-being to digital safety to how to use AI to help with learning. How do you prepare and partner with parents to make sure that they're on the same page?
Yeah, I mean, I think that they need to be involved from as soon as you think you're going to start a program, getting either a small group of parents involved, like maybe a PTG, or if you want to have an open door parent
Parent-teacher group.
Yeah. No, I don't know what the T stands for, actually. It's just an American ism, sorry, but like a small group of parent voices. But I think that's really important at that very beginning stage, because they know that they are involved and they have that, and then they begin to have that buy-in. But like you said, parents don't always know what their kids are doing at home. So instead of that fear, I think it's never great to instill it because of fear, but talk about all the benefits, focus on the things that are going to be amazing. Remember, we talked about meeting all the learners where they are. Focus on all those things that you're going to get to add to your classroom versus, you know, the scary, what are they doing behind the door, even though we know that needs to be talked about. I think another really great way to do it is to do some model classrooms when you're just beginning to think about it. So take a group of parents in, or even have an open day and showcase a couple classrooms where it's happening, to see that kid accessing the text that they would normally never be able to see those kids working collaboratively. So yeah, I think those are just from get-go, you need to have the parents kind of involved and sharing those benefits and the whys. So.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Ashley. We've talked about this a little bit already around the parent stuff, so Ollie. So I'm going to jump on to the next question for you, which I know you're going to love, right? Because it's around infrastructure and ecosystem, right? So we're going to get a little bit techie here, because like particularly here in the UK, there's a lot of pushback on technology in schools, particularly sort of children's phones, and we know they're a distraction, right? But BYOD isn't about children having phones in their pockets, and we talked about the importance of MDMs, the mobile device management solutions, and I think we've given a really good case for why having a device as part of your teaching or part of your learning, toolkit is absolutely important. So I want to talk about things like Wi-Fi, bandwidth, charging management, device compatibility, long-term sustainability, Ollie. These sorts of key metrics, they're really interesting stuff. But school leaders aren't often that techie. So if I'm viewing this today as a member of SLT and thinking, do you know what, we really should at the Ollie Lewis School, Ollie Lewis, the Ashley Bryant Academy, be looking at BYOD now. Where do we get started with infrastructure? Because it's a big investment, isn't it? If we haven't got anything in place already, so it's going to be technical, financial, logistical. What do we need to have in place before introducing BYOD at scale?
I think you need to know what your kind of goal is as an organization, certainly around learning and the road you want to get down on that. You mentioned a bunch of different things, so Wi-Fi, and Ashley mentioned earlier access points. So, can your network handle hundreds, if not thousands, of devices connecting to it at once, simultaneously, and being asked to do something? Have you got enough throughput? Do you have enough access points around the school? Ask your IT network manager, your technical team for a Wi-Fi heat map, so you can find out where your kind of dark spots are, where there is no Wi-Fi, and does that present you with a learning problem because perhaps one of those places is a classroom? So do you have that kind of Wi-Fi network up and running and ready for the journey that you want to go ahead, to ensure that learning is at the front and center of what you do? Charging solutions is a nightmare for anybody, right? Because schools were built a long time ago. Even in the UAE, when schools are built now, there's just never enough charging spaces. So, do you have some sort of strategy where you might have a charging locker or designated spaces in the school, or do you retrofit classrooms where before they were kind of 2 plugs? Do you make that more plugs so that it can kind of fit there? It's worth involving as well your kind of facilities team on that. From a health and safety viewpoint, you don't want suddenly lots of extension cables plugged into every classroom across the school, because that just presents you with additional problems. In terms then of other issues around kind of, I guess, infrastructure, you're then looking at things like the compatibility that you have with your devices across all of the millions of different platforms you have, right? So your kind of learning management system and the core tools you use, regardless of if you're Windows or Google or iOS, kind of what does that look like, and how are you putting learning front and center so that either your student body or your teaching body don't come up against issues in the event where that is a problem? We then can talk around wider things around the network, like filtering and monitoring, and are you meeting the kind of local, national, online safety requirements with those, and who feeds into that? And do students actively get involved in telling you these are the kind of platforms that we've come across by mistake, please add it to the kind of filtering and monitoring systems that you have in school? We're moving forwards with classroom.cloud. I'm really excited with that because it enables us as a school to be at the forefront of that and actually be proactive rather than reactive when something goes wrong. And I think it's really important in that kind of sphere that schools get into that place where you have more cloud-based solutions that give you not just access to learning materials and resources, but give you flexibility, scalability, and the right information at the right time so that you can keep learning front and center and support and safeguard students at the same time. You talked about financial planning. I'm just trying to cover everything that you mentioned, Mark.
So that was the last one.
Yeah, refresh cycles are really important. So are you future focused and thinking forwards with your financial plan? Financial plans don't just end at the end of this academic year or the next, they keep going. And what does your growth as a school look like? How do you fit into that model so that if you do expand, you can cope with the rate of expansion and the additional layers of cost that it covers, not just on more access points in your network, and the scaling overall across your whole kind of digital ecosystem. So there's lots to think about. I would suggest you involve everybody in that conversation, especially the people, the superheroes behind the scenes, your IT team, because typically they're only involved when someone on SLT comes knocking to say, we've got a problem, how do we fix this? Well, involve them from the start, right? You know, our digital leadership group is the principal, some heads of school, and the IT lead. It's really important that he or she is involved in that conversation so that they can guide and advise you on the technical aspects of all these things that many of us just take for granted. Please make it work.
Yeah. Thanks, Ollie. I gave you a hard task there with so many. Well done, little clap there for remembering all of those in there.
Thanks.
Ashley, did you have anything to add on to that, Ashley, at all from your sort of perspective?
No, I think you did a great job summarizing. I've gone through a recent digital transformation in my previous role in the UAE, and those were the million things we had to think about. And then there's always something that you don't plan, right? There's always something you miss along the way. But if you have a good plan overall, generally those little niggles aren't too bad.
Brilliant stuff. Thank you, Ashley. With my UK hat on, it's interesting you mentioned things around refresh cycles. So the DFE for England have released the meeting, the standard sort of documentation for a whole bunch of things, and one of the things included in there is the refresh cycles for devices. And so interesting, and even so, like even around on devices, about appropriateness of certain devices. So, for example, 9.7 inches and below is too small on a tablet device. For example, on the sort of standardized documentation from the government here. But on refresh cycles there, they talk about sort of 3 years for tablets, 5 years for laptops and desktops. Although if you buy a Mac, I think the average sort of lifespan is about 20 years. So I joke there, but Macs do tend to last a bit longer. No, I think it's important to sort of consider all those sort of things, and it is again all about context, isn't it? Right? And that future planning, because it's all very well and good investing in some technology today, but what about in 3 years' time? If it is a 3-year refresh cycle, where would the money come from then? And it's all very well and good having a short to medium term plan, but you do need to think to the future. So yeah, brilliant. Thank you both for all of that. Ashley, I wanted to talk about sort of different contexts, from boarding to other internationals, because now, I've worked with schools in China and the UK and other places around where they've got boarding context, and obviously BYOD in those sort of settings, is different to what BYOD might look like in a non-boarding school, for example. What unique challenges have you seen in sort of the various contexts you've worked in, and how do differing sort of regional laws or cultural differences or expectations influence BYOD strategy? Cultural sensitivity is hugely important, isn't it, right?
Oh, 100%. And I think maybe Ollie will understand this, but I think one of the biggest things for us when we did BYOD in the UAE is that idea that it's a device for school. So I can email you at 10 o'clock at night and you'll help me figure out the problem because my student has it because it's for school. So I think just, making sure that there's that clear guidance about this is a device for school between school hours, but at home, this is also your responsibility. Don't just check out. Don't assume that the kid is always doing the right thing. It was really interesting. I read on that recent Ofcom report that around network protection and filtering and all of that, parents said that the biggest things they do is trust their kids and talk to them. They hadn't set up any kind of downtime or, any restrictions on websites. So I think it's always a big one to keep in mind. And then, in Germany, with all the GDPR and Germany's a big place where my data is my data. How dare you even think to look at my device? Or I don't have to show you that. So that one's a big relationship builder, I think, for sure. The idea that we're not going to take anything we shouldn't have, and we're there to protect your children. We constantly have those conversations around how we can do the best for the kids. And even though it's a personal device, we're there to help. So, yeah.
Great, thank you, Ashley. Anything to add on to that at all, Ollie? Or are you just
No, I think Ashley has kind of nailed that.
Brill. Well, I'm going to jump quickly then onto, and we touched upon this a little bit already from one of your responses earlier, Ashley, about form factor and age suitability and things. So this is the question, and I sort of follow the banana principle in in what you do is the way that you do it, and that's what gets results, right? But the question really is an iPad? It's not, is an iPad better than a Chromebook? Is a laptop better? But yeah,
You
I'm
can
not going
start
to
a
put
riot,
any
Mark.
of you. Yeah, no, you start a riot at an EdTech event by saying, "Is it GIF or is it GIF?"
Oh
But I'll
yeah.
leave that one for later. But iPads, Chromebooks, laptops, age appropriateness. What's and isn't it what's better? What's most appropriate? And I know you can both feed into this conversation. What sort of things do you consider and think about? And I'll jump to you first, Ollie.
I think age appropriateness and learning is probably the most important thing, right? And most people argue around not those things necessarily. They argue around consistency. Now, yes, that's appropriate, but you have to factor in age appropriateness. And there shouldn't be a one size fits all approach in this sphere. So if you take our youngest learners, right, a laptop's not necessarily good for them. They need something that is kind of touch based, like an iPad or a tablet in some way, shape, or form, because developmentally that's more suitable for their age relatedness. They're more intuitive, and you can support kind of early literacy and oracy and creativity more with a device like that. So I think a real lens on learning, you've got to come back to learning, pedagogy, and age appropriateness. Yes, as someone gets older, they kind of migrate towards a laptop because that's kind of more suited for the more literary subjects, writing more. I would say coding, now that AI can do all of that for you, that's kind of dead in the water in some senses. The klaxon goes off again, but I think age relatedness and where you're at in the stage is really important.
Absolutely, I completely agree with you there. And I'm interested to see what Ashley's thoughts are now.
I think age related, you talked pedagogical, but I also think robustness as well. Giving a 7 or even a 5-year-old a MacBook, you're going to be doing that whole refresh cycle much faster than you expect to be doing it. I think one of the conversations around mixed ecosystem BYOD as well. So I'm currently in a school, I've only been here a year, where they do iPads to Chromebooks to MacBooks. Is that the best way to do it? Because the Chromebook is pretty robust. It has a touch screen. It has a really good keyboard. There's tons of pluses and minuses, but yeah, definitely age appropriate is going to be a big one for me as well.
Brilliant. Thank you both. If I could add one thing to it, really, it frames into what Ollie was sharing before around the 5 C's and digital cognition and things. It's a really important foundational piece about thinking about your context. And so being mindful of what your parents can afford, if you're doing the parent purchase devices and that sort of thing as well, needs to sort of come into it. I love that you mentioned robustness, because often you can spend as much time picking a device as you can spend on the case for that device to protect it, right? So considering all those things are important too. Thanks both. We're on the home stretch now. Ashley, our BYOD isn't working. We need to pivot. Things don't always go right, do they? Government might throw a spanner in the works and say, we were talking earlier about one of the German states sort of, moving away from Microsoft 365 completely. But you might have just, you might be at the start of a BYOD where you're completely focused on using Microsoft 365. If the plan doesn't deliver, or a spanner from a governmental level comes in, and you have to change direction, how do you pivot and reframe while still maintaining that sort of trust and momentum with parents? Because obviously, it takes a long time to build a relationship and a moment to break it. So, have you any experience or kind of like advice about what to do in that sort of situation?
I think, yeah, I'm in the middle of a bit of that right now. I think that's super, that trust and transparency and the talking, those are our 3 T's that we use here at FIS a lot of the time, are super important. And understanding that just because you made a decision doesn't mean you're locked in forever. And I think this is so many things in education. Just because we've bought a software doesn't mean we have to keep buying it forever. You need to constantly reflect and ensure that it's meeting the needs of your learners, it's meeting the needs of your school. So we're currently reevaluating one of our grade levels on which device is the best device and whether BYOD is the right thing. So again, getting those parents in, those, small group of parents to talk through it, the leaders in, everyone needs to have a voice, the IT team, what's working, what's not working, and why, and understanding that the kids are the heart of it, right? If it's not working because the kids are getting too much access to something, or the device isn't robust enough, they're big whys. Your learning is the core of what you're doing. So yeah, not just throwing a letter in the mail on 5 days before the first day of school saying, hey, new device on the first day of school. So I think that is definitely a mistake some schools make. They think, the parents will be ready for it. But yeah.
Yeah, no, brilliant advice there. Thank you. And one of my biggest learnings over the years as well is about bringing in parents, getting their voice, letting them be part of it. And the 3 words I loved the most from what you shared there was the phrase meeting the needs. Yeah, or 4 words, meeting the needs of, right? And again, learners, community, all those different things, and keeping children at the heart of what you're doing is always going to help keep you on the right track, and using that as a compass. Really, really useful. Thanks, Ashley. Ollie, did you have anything to add to that at all? Have you been involved in any sort of like pivots that you've had to do in a moment? I know it's been quite interesting in Abu Dhabi with the release of the sort of ADEC policies. I'm also mindful that it was once light outside your room when we first started the conversation. It's now gone dark. So if you could keep your response brief, that would be brilliant.
Yeah, it's there's a lot to unpick there. Ashley's points are really salient, and I think with any plan you should stress test it. So if I think about what we've recently just done, we've reviewed our cyber response plan. We've now got a plan in place to stress test that, to see how we respond as an organisation when something like that, if it were, touch wood, hopefully not, to ever happen. But it's about information communication and kind of, I won't say onboarding, but awareness of your kind of stakeholder community so that they're in the loop and have that kind of voice in it, to be very quick and short and understand.
That's some great advice there, Ollie. I remember a good friend of Net Sports and of mine and Ollie's. I'm not sure if you know him, but you should connect with him if you haven't, Ashley. Gary Henderson, Director of IT at Millfield, was on a while back, and we were talking about cyber security, and he was saying there, it shouldn't be like anything else. So if you practice for the worst case scenarios around fire drills, around evacuations, so why don't we do the same thing with cyber attacks? We should have a drill. What happens? How do you respond? And he was sharing how they'd sort of pivoted their policy to making sure that there was an additional person on, if it was to happen, there was an additional person on site to support the IT team with their well-being, to make sure they had cups of tea, they had food, they could be there through the night, in response. So, that stress testing thing you mentioned there, Ollie, is absolutely brilliant. Thank you. We are definitely on the home straight now. Final reflections. But question to both of you, and it's a fastest finger first response this time, so let's see how we get on with this one. So finally, if a school leader came to you today asking, so we are thinking about BYOD, we are, and they've watched our webinar, they've sent you a little private message on LinkedIn, and we'll share Ashley and Ollie's socials in the show notes below, so please do check those out and connect with them, because as you better tell, they are brilliant and very happy to share. They're thinking about BYOD. Where do they begin? What would be that one non-negotiable piece of advice you'd want them to leave with? Ashley was first. Look at that, straight in. Teachers are so competitive, right?
I would say, if you're going to, whatever you do, get as close to a managed BYOD as you can. Get, any of the amazing platforms that can help to support you with your kids. Don't let it run away. So manage BYOD is my hook there.
Great stuff. Thank you so much, Ashley. And to you, Ollie?
Start with your kind of education. Start with your educational vision and values. I think don't start with technology. Start with learning. And can I say a few more? Please, sir, can I say a few more? I would say start there.
Brilliant stuff. Well, listen, last final question. Obviously, as I said before, if you're watching today, please, and you're still with us, please do connect with Ashley and Ollie. They share loads and loads on their socials. They're always open for a conversation. They're clearly happy to give up time to talk to some rambling bloke from the southwest of England about things like BYOD. Have you got any resources, both of you, that you could share that you've written or produced in the recent sort of last 6 months? Any CPD tools? Ollie, you mentioned the Educational Endowment Foundation report and things around implementation. Are there any kind of things that you think would be really useful for them to take away? Ashley's put in a really brilliant resource up there. I'm not going to say anything there. Ollie, do you want to talk about that resource?
Yeah, sure. So it's available on Amazon in all regions of the world and on Hachette Learning. It's called the EdTech Playbook. It's a book I co-authored with someone, if you're watching, you might know. It's the host, Mr. Mark Anderson. It's a kind of capture all around educational technology in schools in the current day and age for teaching, learning, artificial intelligence, and everything. Digital citizenship. It's kind of got 3 sections in the book. Section 1's around digital transformation. Section 2 is kind of field guides, so case studies across the world. And then Section 3 has got everything around digital citizenship, digital leadership, working with vendors. It's got everything. It's been very affectionately named by someone not by either of the co-authors of the Bible of Educational Technology. So that's probably my best resource, Mark.
Great stuff, thank you, and thank you for sharing that, Ashley. I can see you grabbing something else there. What were you grabbing, Ashley?
Oh, I was just looking at my stack of books. I mean, it might not be 100% BYOD, but there's another great one here that I've got.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's all about team net support today. So first up, Ashley shares a book by myself and Ollie. Then the Awkward Questions in Education by the MD CEO Al Kingsley, MBE. Got to meet King Charles just very recently on his investiture at Buckingham Palace.
That's cool.
What I love about Awkward Questions is that it's got dedicated chapters. It's not all about one thing, one topic. There are lots of really important, interesting topics, and things around implementation are in there. Things around AI in education and the voice around are in there. And the thing that's even better than that about each of those different bits there, I don't know what your thoughts are how far you've read through the book, Ashley, but I've read it, and what I love is whilst it gives you loads of information, it doesn't give you loads of answers, but it gives you lots of resource and places to go to find out more and more to frame that thinking around it. So definitely a brilliant resource. Have you read it and finished it yourself yet, Ashley?
I haven't finished it because I bought both of them at the same time. So I have a lot of reading to do. Summer is near. But that's the thing I love about both of them, actually, is that they're not scary. They don't have that, really high level techie technologist language. It's stuff that a leader of a school who knows very little can get involved with. Like it's definitely attainable, which is very helpful for people who are sometimes afraid of us.
Well, listen, you've been really kind, Ashley, in sharing things from myself and from Ollie and from Al as well. I will signpost your socials as well. Ashley is so kind in what she does. She probably doesn't see herself as being like an influencer, but she definitely influences me, my thinking. She keeps me honest as well because she's not afraid of coming back and saying, but hang on, and what have you on stuff too. Although she politely does that behind the scenes rather than calling me out publicly on socials. She shares loads of really interesting resources, some of which are her own, and then on top of that as well, she sort of showcases lots of things that are going on in her school as well, which I think is really good because sharing what happens in your school, the good, the bad, and the ugly. You know, we learn, like I said at the outset of this session today, that sometimes it's the things that haven't worked with teachers more than the things where we're sort of, hi, we're living our best life in our school and it's amazing. So yeah, please do follow Ashley. You're on, like I said, 17,000 different social media platforms, but you've got a. Do you want to share where people can find you, Ashley?
I got lucky, actually. I've been able to have the same name everywhere. It's EduTech Ashley. So yeah, I'm not very on X. It's not my thing, but Instagram and LinkedIn, you can message me anytime, and I'll be there to help out. So
Absolutely, and but not just on there. You're also on Threads. You're also on, which is the Instagram version of
yeah,
sort of Twitter, as it were.
yeah.
You're also on Blue Sky as well. Ashley is easily found. Ollie wasn't so lucky with the singular handle. But if you were to look up Ollie Lewis, you'll find him again on Blue Sky, on X, on LinkedIn, Ollie L on Insta, and what have you as well. And your blog is ollielewislearning.com.
Come on.
Listen, thank you so much for joining us for this extended bumper edition of a webinar from NetSupport, where we focused in on BYOD. Thank you to you for joining us. And if you want to watch back, we'll be sharing the recorded version of this as well. Thanks again to Ashley. Thank you to Ollie. And thanks to you for joining us. Take care, everybody. And I look forward to seeing you on the next webinar coming up soon. Cheers.